SAS Interview Question and Answer, question number 50. What are the different ways to create SAS macro variables? This question is asking about what are the different ways we can create SAS macro variable. There are 5 different ways to create the SAS macro variables, briefly defined as follow. Number 1, using %let statement. By using %let statement, we can define macro variable inside and outside the SAS macro code. If we define inside the macro code, then it is called local macro variable. If we define outside the macro code, then it is called global macro variable. Syntax is given here, %let macro var name, that represents macro variable name we have to provide here, equal value, that value represents the value of macro variable which we have defined. Number 2, call SYMPUT routine. This is the second method. This is a procedure. Routine, that means that this is the procedure that can accept arguments but does not return any value. By using call SYMPUT, we can change data step variable into macro variable, and syntax is given here, call SYMPUT. Inside parentheses, we have to provide macro var name, that means macro variable name, which should be inside the quote, comma, and value. That means macro variable name, first part is that is the variable name, and second value represents the value of this macro variable. Number 3, iterative %do. This is the third method. For dynamic programming, we use macro %do loop. The iterative %do loop is similar to do statement used in data step, but %do can be used anywhere inside macro and used for increment macro variable. Syntax is given here, %do macro variable name we have to provide here, equal starting value %do stopping value, where start value represents the starting value of macro variable, stop value represents the stopping value of macro variable, and sometimes we use increment step, that is %by increment value, which is optional. After then we provide SAS code and %end. When we start with %do, then we have to end with %end. Number 4, macro parameters. This is the fourth method. This is a way to create a piece of code that can be run multiple times. A macro needs to be started with %macro and ended with %mend. And you can use parameter to change the value for each run. Just changing the parameter, we can get the different value, but we run the same set of code. Here, %macro, this is the starting point, %macro, macro underscore name, that is the name of the macro. And inside the parentheses, we provide the macro variable name. Suppose we are going to provide here 2 macro variable, macro var1 name and macro var2 name. These are the 2 variables. After then we have SAS code. The ending of the macro is %mend, and we are calling macro %macro name, whatever we provided at the starting point. And inside the parentheses, we provide the value of macro variable, macro underscore var1 underscore value, that represents the value of first macro variable. macro underscore var2 underscore value that represents the value of second macro variable. These two macro variables are local macro variables. This is the fourth way we can create macro variable in SAS. And fifth one is SAS macro variable in Proc SQL using into clause. In this method, we can create SAS macro variable using Proc SQL procedure. Syntax is given here: Proc SQL semicolon select macro underscore specification. That means that we have to select variable name. Variable selection into macro variable name from source of the data from which table we are going to select variable and quit. This is the fifth method. In this way, we can create SAS macro variable by using 5 different methods. That's all about question number 50. Thank you.